Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I will be discussing my take on Sidisi brewed Tyrant. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is my Patreon. Patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description too. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Sidisi brewed Tyrant is a 3/3 Naga Shaman for 1 generic, 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue. Whenever she enters the battlefield or attacks, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. This makes her useful for Graveyard Matters decks, and this one is no exception. However, not only does Sidisi self-mill us 3 cards whenever she enters the battlefield or attacks, but whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into our graveyard from the library, we create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. This means that regardless of why or for what reason we're milling ourselves, we can get zombies whenever we do. And this is the essence of this deck. This deck aims to synergistically get cards into the graveyard in order to trigger Sidisi for value or to reanimate creatures from our graveyard onto the battlefield. Basically, the graveyard is our hand and the zombie horde our offense and defense. So let's see how we can achieve this. More than simply wanting to mill ourselves just to mill ourselves, we have to be efficient with what we're doing and make no wasted movements. If we are to mill ourselves to get value for Sidisi, we should make the most of it. Doom Whisperer is a no-brainer for this. Not only is it a 6/6 flyer with trample for just 5 mana, but we can self-mill ourselves for free. All we have to do is pay 2 life each time. What's great about Surveil is that we can dig through the deck until we put the best 2 cards we need on top of it. Starting the game with 40 life is incredibly helpful in this regard. But not only are we digging deep through the deck for either answers, combo pieces, or win cons, but we're also potentially creating zombies with Sidisi while doing so. Yet, we can get even more advantage out of self-milling ourselves. For example, cards like Fact or Fiction or Intuition are cards where choices are made for what stays in our hand and what goes to our graveyard. Apart from that, these can be political tools since we can strike deals with opponents for the greater good of the table. Even if we can't, any choice made by opponents are going to be difficult since the deck benefits from having the cards in our graveyard almost as much as in our hands. In and of itself, Intuition is one of the best cards in the deck since it can be used to tutor for our main win con all on its own. Same goes for Jared's Orders and Final Parting. Similarly to Intuition, these are tutors that can put something in our hand as well as our graveyard. Since these spells put cards into our graveyard from the library, they trigger Sidisi. But these particular cards will be seen in greater detail later on, especially since they're used to tutor for our win cons. Bond of Insight self-mills us and also recovers up to 2 instants and or sorceries from our graveyard to our hand. Unfortunately, it's exiled afterwards, but recovering instants and sorceries are important since the deck runs very few of them. This deck wants to run as many creatures as possible since milling a creature card is what triggers Sidisi's zombie creating ability. Life from the Loam is another card that wastes no movements. We can use it to recover up to 3 lands from our graveyard, which is important due to all the self-milling. However, since it has Dredge 3, we can use it to self-mill 3 cards in response to us drawing a card. This can lead to some amazing synergistic interactions and engines which I will discuss in great detail later on. The 3 planeswalkers in the deck, Kiora Master of the Depths, Liliana Death's Majesty, and Tamiyo Collector of Tales, also have an ability that self-mills us with additional benefits. Kiora's -2 has us reveal the top 4 cards in order to choose a creature or land from among them, and then mill the rest. Liliana's +1 mills 2 cards and creates a 2 zombie creature token, so it's possible to get 2 tokens from this ability. Tamiyo's +1 has us name a card and then reveal the top 4 cards of our library. If the card is there, we get to keep it and then mill the rest. All these abilities are great and give us value. On top of that, these planeswalkers' other abilities are also great. Kiora can be used to untap a creature and a land. This deck is running Gaia's Cradle, Cabal Coffers among other utility lands, so this ability is great. We're more on those lands later. Her ultimate gives us an emblem where we can have a creature we enter the battlefield fight any creature. This is a good way to weaponize our zombies as well as any other creature. She also creates 3 8/8 octopus creature tokens. This ultimate is great but not the main reason for running Kiora. Liliana's second ability is amazing since it's a reanimation effect with no drawback. It's even better for this deck since the creature becomes a zombie in addition to its other types. Her ultimate is a tribal dependent board wipe. It's good in case of emergencies but similar to Kiora, not the main reason for running her here. Tamiyo's static ability protects us from discarding cards or sacrificing permanents due to abilities opponents control. We can always sacrifice tokens to sax effects and we don't mind discarding cards, but it's still a good ability to have, especially if it's on a card we're already using for other things. Speaking of which, her final ability recovers a card from our graveyard to our hand. Definitely a great way to recycle instants and sorceries since these are the hardest to recover in the deck. We can also use our zombies created to continue self-milling and get an excellent engine going. Path of Discovery is one such facilitator. When a zombie token enters the battlefield, it's going to explore. We reveal the top card of our library. If it's a land, we put it into our hand. If not, we can mill it and put a +1/+1 counter on our zombie token. What's great about this card is that if the top card is a creature, we can self-mill it, creating a new zombie if Sidisi is out. Then that zombie explores, and we can continue doing this so long as the top card is a creature. Embalmer's Tools is another way to obtain this effect. We can tap the zombie created in order to self-mill the top card of our library. If it's a creature, we can create a new zombie if Sidisi is out. We can then do it again until we run out of zombies to tap. We can do something similar with Altar of Dementia, but we have to sacrifice the zombie token each time. What's great about these two artifacts is that we can also mill opponents as well. If an opponent tutors for something to put on the top of their deck, we can just mill it away with these artifacts. So they can be used both as a self-mill engine and disruption pieces. That being said, the best self-mill facilitator and disruption card in the deck is Mesmeric Orb. Due to Sidisi's wording, no matter how many creatures we self-mill in a single instance, we only get a single zombie creature token. However, Mesmeric Orb triggers for each permanent being untapped. That means that Sidisi is triggered with each Mesmeric Orb triggered. That means that her ability will produce a zombie per each creature self-milled. If we self-mill 5 creatures due to Mesmeric Orb, we get 5 zombie tokens because each instance is different. Mesmeric Orb also affects the entire table, so you're also heavily disrupting opponents. Those not playing a graveyard strategy at least, nor those running the Eldrazi Titans. Speaking of which, Olumang the Infinite Gyre and Kozilek Butcher of Truth are included in this deck in order to prevent us from milling ourselves out of the game. That being said, the deck does produce a significant amount of mana, so they can also be hard cast if the situation calls for it. Getting these out on the battlefield early enough is no joke. Now, self-milling for value is great and all, but why leave things to chance when we can just manipulate the top deck in order to try and always get a zombie token whenever we self-mill? Scroll Rack is possibly the best card in this regard. You can quote-unquote draw cards with it, and then top deck cards from your hand. Naturally, you want to top deck creatures, especially creatures will be reanimating afterwards, but more on that later on. That way we can always get even more value from self-milling since we're guaranteed a creature in the process. A card like Mortuary might seem bad since we take away our own draw by top decking any creature that dies. However, since we're milling away the top cards of our library, those creatures that die will fuel Sidisi, granting us zombie tokens in the process. The creatures end up in the graveyard after a more roundabout process, but we get value from it regardless. In any case, we can also just draw into that creature if we need it in a more pressing time frame. Bold-Ass Stronghold does something similar. For 2 mana and tapping, you can top deck a creature card from your graveyard. You can do this in response to self-milling in order to get a zombie token, or you can do this in response to draw in order to recover a creature. Oh, and it can also tap for mana without entering the battlefield tapped. Sequester Stash does the same but for artifacts, and you have to pay 4 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to do so. The deck doesn't run any artifact creatures, but this is a good way to recover any key artifacts that may have been milled out or destroyed, especially Mesmeric Orb. At this point, it might seem like the deck is too dependent on Sidisi. However, we can create tokens and get other advantages from self-milling. Turntimber Sower creates a 0/1 green plant creature token whenever a land enters our graveyard from anywhere. So not only will the 10 fetches the deck contains create creature tokens when cracked, but any land milled will also trigger Turntimber Sower. These might be as useful for attacking as zombies, but at least we have chump blockers and sacrifice fodder, especially since we can sacrifice 3 creatures to recover a land to our hand. This makes fetches even more useful in the deck. The Gidrock monster is another way to take advantage of all the self-milling. Similar to Turntimber Sower, whenever a land we control goes to the graveyard from anywhere, the monster triggers and we get to draw a card. So it also triggers thanks to the fetch lands. This is another great way to really dig through our deck. You can also add Dakmor Salvage to the deck in order to go infinite with the Gidrock monster, since the Eldrazi Titans will prevent our library from emptying out. You would also need a discard outlet in order to discard Dakmor Salvage when it's in our hand in order to continue the combo. Since I don't want to include cards that apply only to corner cases, I have omitted this particular combo from the deck. Back to the Gidrock monster, as a bonus, it also allows us to play an extra land per turn. We might have to sacrifice a land at the beginning of our upkeep, but that's not a big deal. It's also a 6/6 with Death Touch, so there's also that. But if that weren't enough, it also synergizes incredibly well with Underrealm Lich. If we were to draw a card, instead we look at the top 3 cards of our library, choose one, and then send the rest to the graveyard. This triggers Sidisi, but it can also trigger the Gidrock monster. Basically, if we send lands to the graveyard this way, the monster triggers and we draw a card, which is replaced with the Lich's effect. If we send lands to the graveyard this way, we can do this all over again. Basically, we can continue doing this as long as we have a land to pitch to the graveyard. With Turn Timber Sower in play, we can create quite the plant wall as well. If we're also self-milling creatures this way, we can also get quite the horde fairly quickly with Sidisi out. Alright, and what are we doing with all these cards in the graveyard? Well, it is our second hand after all, so we will use reanimation effects and similar things to play cards from our graveyard. Havengold Lich and Muldrotha the Gravetard let us grasp things from our graveyard. Havengold Lich is limited only to creatures but not to creatures in our graveyard, so we can also access any amazing creatures from our opponent's graveyards. Additionally, it gains any activated abilities from those creatures until end of turn. We do have to pay 1 extra mana, but it's well worth it. It's also a zombie, which is relevant for the deck. Muldrotha is limited to our own graveyard, but we can play any permanent from it, albeit 1 per type during our turns. So we can play a land from our graveyard, a creature, etc. With the Gidrock monster, we can play 2 lands from our graveyard during our turn. Muldrotha is also a great way to recover anything destroyed during a match. So unless opponents have graveyard hate or exile effects, their efforts against us are moot. But I'll discuss that further along in the video. Whispered Blood Liturgist lets us straight up reanimate creatures from our graveyard. We have to sacrifice 2 creatures to do so and tap him, but that's not a big deal with all the tokens we're making. We can even do this in response to an Eldrazi Titan entering the battlefield. We still get the shuffle trigger, but when the Titan enters the battlefield instead of getting shuffled back into the deck. Living Death is a mass reanimation spell where we basically have to lose the creatures we have in play in order to cheat in the ones in our graveyard. This is global though, so our opponents get to do the same. So be careful when facing against other Graveyard Matters decks. Losing the creatures we have in play is no problem since we might just reanimate them later. What's great about these reanimation effects is that the deck is also running ways to tutor creatures into the graveyard. Apart from the previously mentioned Jared's Order and Final Parting and Intuition, Buried Alive is included as well. For just 3 mana, we get to send 3 creatures from our library to the graveyard. If that weren't enough, doing so triggers Sidisi too. Entomb is an instant speed way to get any card into our graveyard for just 1 mana. However, depending on the pod, I use Entomb reactively. For example, if anyone were to cast Rest in Peace or exile our graveyard in some other way, I cast Entomb in response, send an Eldrazi Titan to the graveyard, and just shuffle it all back into the deck until I'm able to deal with it, which I'm going to cover soon enough. Apart from straight up reanimation effects, we can also copy what we have in our graveyard, usually with a much lower mana cost. Body Double enters the battlefield as a copy of any creature in a graveyard. For just 5 mana, we can copy any creature card and get all the benefits from it. Resolve the Multivarious is another way to copy creatures in the graveyard, but we have to pay its converted mana cost each time to do so. We won't get any enter the battlefield triggers, but at least we're able to use a creature even if it's in our graveyard. Another way to kind of reanimate creatures is with the Scarab God. We have to exile the creature though, so do so at your own risk. But for just 4 mana, this god will exile a creature card from our graveyard and create a 4/4 zombie token copy of it. This is great because it can be done at instant speed, meaning that we can copy any utility creature at instant speed. Not only that, but we can do that to any creature in any graveyard. Additionally, at the beginning of our upkeep, each of our opponents lose X life and we scry X, where X is the amount of zombies we control. Suffice it to say that X is going to be a significant number in this deck. That scry X is great not to just dig deep into our deck, but to also set up the top of our library to the most beneficial way when we're self-milling with those previously explained and mentioned effects. We can also reanimate lands in the deck as well. World Shaper is a great card since it has the same attack trigger as Sidisi does. However, when it dies, we get to return all of our lands to the battlefield. If we have enough lands in the graveyard and then sacrifice it somehow, we can get a huge mana advantage compared to the rest of the table. This will help fuel epic plays like casting more things from our graveyard or transforming Lazav into any fatty in our graveyard. Last but not least is Eternal Witness. Not a reanimation effect per se, but we can use it to recover any instant or sorcery in our graveyard, which is the hardest card type to recur in the deck. We can also recover any card we need. Being on a body means that it will trigger Sidisi when self-milled, and that's the most important aspect of this deck. We want to have as many creatures in it as possible, so anytime an effect comes printed on a creature, it will replace its non-creature counterpart in this deck. Such creatures are the disruption effects in the deck. This deck doesn't run conventional counter spells, but it does run counter magic stapled onto bodies, as explained just now. Lenonendra Archmage, Mystic Snake, and Frill Mystic are all counter spells on a body. The latter two counter a spell when they enter the battlefield, but the Fairy counters a non-creature spell if you play 1 blue and sacrifice it. Fortunately, it has Persist, so you can at least do it once more. Either way, if it does end up going to the graveyard, you can just reanimate it again. The same goes for the Snake and the Mystic. The deck does run conventional responses like Cyclonic Rift, Assassin's Trophy, and Void Slime, which are all crucial to protect our board state or combos as well as disrupting our opponents. An overloaded Cyclonic Rift at the end of the turn before we swing in with a huge horde of zombies usually spells game over for the entire table. Assassin's Trophy gets rid of anything, while Void Slime can also counter triggered and activated abilities, which is great for planeswalkers going ultimate, cascade, etc. Null Mage Shepherd can destroy annoying artifacts and enchantments. We have to tap 4 untapped creatures we control, but the Shepherd can be one of those. This is great against Pillow Fort decks or against the previously mentioned Rest in Peace. It's also great against Blood Moon, Leyline of the Void, Grafdigger's Cage, etc. Pretty much all the graveyard hate effects can be taken care of with Null Mage Shepherd. And if something were to get exiled, we have the Rift Sweeper for that. Granted, Rift Sweeper isn't going to be that helpful if the entire library is exiled, but we can at least recover any key combo pieces. It's definitely something more people should be playing in their decks. One final way we can disrupt opponents with is opposition. This card is incredibly oppressive here. With enough zombie tokens, we can lock opponents' lands out of the game. During their upkeep, we can just tap down enough zombies to tap their lands so that they can't cast anything during their main phase. This might seem cruel to do, but all's fair in love and war. We can also use zombie tokens to tap down creatures in response to the combat step in order to stop anything we wouldn't be able to stop otherwise. Alright, so let's discuss the combos of the deck. Some were hinted at or mentioned earlier. I'm going to explain the ones used to win outright though. As has been seen so far, the deck has incredible synergy, so there's a ton of interlocking and overlapping pieces to many engines. However, the deck can combo out of nowhere to win the game. One such method is with Mesmeric Orb. On its own, it's amazing. However, combined with Sidisi and a Fatal Alchemist, we can go infinite. A Fatal Alchemist works well on its own since it can untap a creature or artifact, meaning that it can also be used for mana if we're untapping a rock or a dork, but the way it's worded means that we can also use it to untap itself. If we do that with Mesmeric Orb on the battlefield, we can do so indefinitely. With CDC in play, we can create infinitely many zombie tokens since the Eldrazi Titans prevents us from self-milling ourselves out. We can also do this with Kyora's Follower. This can untap any other permanent, so unfortunately it doesn't work like a Fatal Alchemist. However, it can still untap lands, mana dorks, and mana rocks on its own. We can combine it with Clever Impersonator though. Clever Impersonator is such a great card in the deck since it can pretty much copy any non-land card on the battlefield. However, when combined with Kyora's Follower, they can just indefinitely untap themselves. Doing this with Mesmeric Orb and CDC in play has the same effect as a Fatal Alchemist. You could add Fate Stitcher instead of Kyora's Follower since it has Unearth. That way, for just 1 blue mana, it can reanimate itself and then have the same effect. However, I prefer Kyora's Follower since it's better in the early game. Since these combos can be done at instant speed, we can do this at the end of the turn before ours in order to amass an infinitely large zombie horde to swing in for the kill. Fortunately, we don't have to wait until we have infinitely many zombies to swing in for the kill. Filth in the Graveyard and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth on the battlefield makes all of our creatures unblockable. This is very easy to accomplish as well. With the previously mentioned Final Parting, we choose Filth for the Graveyard and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth to our hand. With the previously mentioned Jarrett's Orders, we choose Filth for the Graveyard and any of our tutors on a body for the creature to our hand. For example, we can choose CDC Undead Vizier, Runescar Demon, or Razaketh the Foul-Blooded to go to our hand. Each of these can tutor for Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Of course, they can tutor for any card we need or want, but at least they can help assemble our combos easier. If you already have some combo pieces out, you can send either of those more expensive creatures to the graveyard and then send a cheaper copier to your hand like the previously mentioned Body Double, Whisper Blood Liturgist, etc. In fact, thanks to Body Double, you can have Craterhoof Behemoth for almost half of its cost. Use either Jarrett's Orders or Final Parting to send Craterhoof Behemoth to the graveyard and Body Double to your hand. Then cast Body Double as a 5-mana Craterhoof Behemoth. Craterhoof Behemoth is definitely an amazing finisher, especially in a deck with so many tokens. Even then, those aren't the only finishers. Assuming we can't kill an opponent off with combat damage, Diregraph Captain can seal the deal. With enough zombies and a free sacrifice outlet, we can just sacrifice our zombies to ping an opponent until removing them from the game. As a bonus, Diregraph Captain has Death Touch and gives +1/+1 to our other zombies, so it makes our horde more dangerous. Death Baron makes our horde even more dangerous since they receive Death Touch as well as +1/+1. So not only are they the best blockers but can attack for even more damage, so it's definitely a great card here. In any case, the deck's running Tolaria West, which can be used to tutor for Urborg or any of the other utility lands in the deck. Oh, and that will also trigger the Gitrog monster and turn Timber Sower. You can also tutor for lands in the deck thanks to Elvish Reclaimer. Dropping this on turn 1 means that we can tutor for Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth as early as turn 2. You can then tutor for Cabal Coffers the next turn, Gaia's Cradle the turn after, etc. If not dealt with, you can very easily get all your best lands in play before the mid-game. Oh, and sacrificing these lands trigger turn Timber Sower and the Gitrog monster. However, as far as creatures are concerned, we can do something similar thanks to Prime Speaker Vannifar. A birthing pod on a body, this is just what the deck needs. Remember that the more creatures in this deck, the better. It is possible to make so many birthing pod chains in this deck that if you really want to get into those details, I suggest you go to the 36th page of that thread. I will post a link in the description, where you can see some really intense Magic the Gathering problem solving for the Johnniest of Johnnies and Jenniest of Jennies. Intruder Alarm is included in the deck not just because it combos with Prime Speaker Vannifar, but because of the previously mentioned Embalmer's Tools and Opposition. If we create a new zombie token, then all of our creatures untap and we can get even more activations going. So this helps other strategies as well. But I will give at least one example of a possible Birthing Pod chain in the deck with Vannifar and Intruder Alarm out. Again, there are just so many different ways to abuse Vannifar in the deck that you just have to read my primer thread in MTGSalvation or MTGNexus to really see how intense it is. In any case, let's say we start with a zombie token. From there we get a 1-costed creature. It untaps Vannifar when it enters the battlefield. Then we trade that for any 2-costed creature. It also untaps Vannifar when it enters the battlefield. Then we trade that for any 3-costed creature. Again, it untaps Vannifar. Then we trade that for any 4-costed creature. When it enters, it untaps Vannifar. Then we trade that for any 5-costed creature. It untaps Vannifar. Then we trade that for any 6-costed creature. It untaps Vannifar. Then we trade that for any 7-costed creature. Again, it untaps Vannifar. Then we trade that for any 8-costed creature. Notice how in this particular chain we get mana dorks and combo pieces in the graveyard as well as Razaketh onto the battlefield. We can use Protean Hulk dying to get more combo pieces onto the battlefield, as well as more sacrifice fodder for Vannifar to make even more Birthing Pod chains, or for Razaketh to help us tutor for pieces. If we use Protean Hulk's death trigger to tutor for enough creatures to sacrifice to Razaketh, we can tutor for pretty much anything the deck needs. 1000-Year Elixir is included in the deck, not just as another way to untap Vannifar if we don't have Intruder Alarm out, but as a way to have our creatures tap for abilities as if they had haste, especially a Fatal Alchemist when we have Mesmeric Orb out. The deck might seem mana hungry, but it's not really that way. In any case, I take advantage of its colors and add varying forms of mana generation. Mana dorks are a must since the more creatures in the deck, the more likely it is to get a zombie token from Sidisi's trigger. So the deck has Birds of Paradise, Dryad Arbor, which also triggers both the Gitrog monster and Turn Timbersower for being a land too, and Bloom Tender. Bloom Tender is great because it can tap for 3 colors in this deck. If we steal creatures from opponents' graveyards that are of other colors, then it can tap down for even more colors. Additionally, the deck can untap lands with the previously mentioned Kira's Follower, Krosan Restorer, and Voyaging Satyr. More often than not, Krosan Restorer is going to untap 3 lands, which is nothing to scoff at. Voyaging Satyr may only be able to untap 1 land, but that land could be something like Gaia's Cradle or Cabal Coffers, which produce a ton of mana here, especially since the deck runs Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth for filth. So it also combos with the coffers. We can also untap Gaia's Cradle with Minamo School at Water's Edge and Deserted Temple. The temple could untap any land, but Minamo isn't just for untapping Gaia's Cradle. It can also untap Vannifar in order to use her ability multiple times in a turn. A Fatal Alchemist and Kira's Follower can do that as well. Again, the deck is brimming with synergy and interlocking overlapping pieces. Thespian Stage is used to copy any utility land like Deserted Temple, but it can also copy Cabal Coffers or any rainbow land in a pinch. It can also copy any opponent's land if they happen to have anything good enough. Recall that the deck is also running Talaria West, which can be used to tutor for any of the lands besides Urborg. In order to diversify mana sources, the deck's running Sol Ring and Mana Crypt, both of which can be untapped without Fatal Alchemist and Kira's Follower. These might not help in an early Sidisi casting, but are definitely great for accelerating our turns for the more expensive spells. Seedborn Muse is also included in the deck not just as a way to untap all of our mana sources in order to keep mana open, to pay for abilities, or to cast our responses when needed, but we can also untap all of our zombies to once again tap them all down for Embalmer's Tools or Opposition, or to just have them up for blockers. The rest of the mana comes from the remaining lands. The deck is running Command Tower, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Reflecting Pool, all 3 dual lands, all 3 shock lands, the previously mentioned 10 fetch lands, and 2 of each snow-covered basic land, in case opponents are running anything that benefits us for it. Blood Moon is a thing also, so it's good to have some basic lands in the deck. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Sidisi Brew Tyrant. This deck seeks to synergize as much as possible with its pieces in order to ultimately win via combo or combat with all the zombies being created. Sidisi also has the best colors to run the best answers, which we use to protect our combos, graveyard, or prevent other players from comboing off. Keep in mind that this is not the only way to run Sidisi, nor the most optimized way. My decks tend to range between 6 to 8, but you can easily build a CDH version with the Sushi Hulk package. I should note that you can also follow the links in the description to my primer on Sidisi. There you can find an alternate build for Sidisi that's focused on Zombie Tribal. You can also find a very brutal budget deck that comes out to less than $50 as of the recording of this video. So if you want an even deeper explanation and guide for building Sidisi, just go to those links. The build explained in this video is a lot of fun to pilot and play. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description, as well as in the primers. If I were to make a video version of my primer, it would be hours long. But Sidisi is such an amazing commander that I highly recommend you check out said primers. Not only for a deeper explanation of this build, but for a deep tutorial on the zombie tribal build as well as the budget version. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.